You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. Russian America was initially populated by Russian hunters and traders known as promyshleniki, who had moved across Siberia and reached Alaska by 1732. By 1799, the Russian-American Company was officially formed to manage the fur hunting in the area. Although no formal colony was set up, the Russian Orthodox Church did send missionaries to work with the native populations and establish churches. Roughly 700 Russians were overseeing a territory more than double the size of Texas at the time. In 1821, Tsar Alexander I claimed Russia's control over the North American Pacific coast north of the 51st parallel, even imposing a rule that foreign ships couldn't come within 100 Italian miles, which is about 115 miles or 185 kilometers of this claimed area. John Quincy Adams, the U.S. Secretary of State at the time, wasn't happy with this, since it could hamper American trade and expansion plans. In an effort to maintain good relations with the U.S., Tsar Alexander agreed to the Russo-American Treaty in 1824, which scaled back Russian territorial claims to north of the 54 degrees 40 minutes parallel, and allowed U.S. ships into Russian ports. By the 1850s, the sea otter population had dramatically declined, affecting the fur trade, and Russia found itself in need of funds following its defeat in the Crimean War. Observations from the California gold rush suggested that any discovery of gold in Alaska would lead to an overwhelming American and Canadian presence in the area, referred to by one academic as Siberia's Siberia. However, the main reason for considering the sale of Alaska was the fear that it could be easily taken by British forces from nearby Canada in any future conflict. Tsar Alexander II and his advisors believed the territory was indefensible and did not want Britain, their rival, to have a position so close across the Bering Sea. Discussions about selling Alaska to the U.S. took place in 1857 and 1858, but they were postponed due to concerns about the impending American Civil War. Grand Duke Constantine, the Tsar's younger brother, was instrumental in pushing for the sale, arguing that America's territorial ambitions would inevitably lead to them taking over Russian America. Tsar Alexander II responded positively to Constantine's memo, and several Russian officials, including Admiral Yevgeny Putyatyn and Eduard de Stoekel, the Russian minister to the U.S., also supported the withdrawal from North America. The discussions led to a decision to wait until the Russian-American Company's charter expired in 1861 before making any moves. In the lead-up to the sale, de Stoekel engaged in informal talks with U.S. officials, indicating America's interest in acquiring the territory. An initial offer of $5 million was considered too low by the Russians. However, the political climate in the U.S. delayed any further negotiations until after the Civil War. Russia saw the sale as an opportunity not just to rid themselves of a financial burden, but also to potentially weaken British influence by having American territory buffer British Columbia. Finally, following the Union's victory in the Civil War, negotiations resumed in earnest in 1867. Despite various domestic challenges, President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William H. Seward were keen on the purchase to shift the public focus from internal to external matters. The deal was clinched after an all-night negotiation, and at 4 a.m. on March 30, 1867, the treaty was signed, securing the sale for $7.2 million, about 2 cents per acre, or roughly $129 million in today's money. The name Alaska originates from the Russian word Alyaska, or Alyeska, stemming from an Aleut term that translates to great land or mainland. When the United States acquired this territory from Russia, they opted to retain the name Alaska for the region. Discussing the population of Alaska at the time of its purchase, Seward revealed that Russia estimated there were approximately 60,000 individuals residing there. This number included about 10,500 persons directly connected to the Russian Fur Company. Roughly 8,000 were indigenous individuals and 2,500 were of Russian or mixed ancestry, such as possessing a Russian father and an indigenous mother. The remaining 50,000 were Inuit or Alaska natives living independently of Russian dominion. Seward noted that Russians had erected 23 trading posts within the region, strategically situated on islands and coastal points for convenient access. In many of these smaller posts, merely a few Russians were employed to procure furs from the local populace, which were then stored and transported when the company's ships made port. Additionally, he mentioned two principal towns: New Archangel, now recognized as Sitka, which was established in 1804 as a central point for the profitable sea otter fur trade, and comprised 116 log cabins with 968 residents by 1867, and St. Paul, situated in the Pribilof Islands, housing 100 homes and 283 individuals, acting as the nucleus of the seal fur industry. Seward, along with numerous other Americans of that era, was convinced that Asia would become a crucial market for U.S. commodities. They viewed Alaska as a pivotal location for trading with Asia and as a means to broaden American influence across the Pacific. Senator Charles Sumner, who served as the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, endorsed the treaty in the Senate, advocating for Alaska's potential not merely for commerce but also for its inherent worth. Sumner, having examined explorer records, was persuaded of the territory's abundance in wildlife and forests. He paralleled the acquisition of Alaska with other European colonial endeavors of that time, like the French conquest of Algeria. The treaty secured overwhelming approval from the United States Senate with a vote of 37-2. Back in 1867, many Americans thought the Alaska Purchase was tainted by corruption. However, by 1872, W. H. Dall was arguing convincingly, there can be no doubt that the feelings of a majority of the citizens of the United States are in favor of it. Fast forward 120 years, a scholar pointed out that the belief in the purchase's unpopularity is a persistent myth, one that survives despite clear evidence otherwise, and historians' best efforts to debunk it. This myth likely hangs on because it fits nicely with the image of Alaskans as independent pioneers, distinct from the rest of the country. When it came to newspapers back then, a good number were either in favor of the Alaska Purchase or didn't really take a stance. Research into numerous newspapers of the time showed widespread support, especially in places like California. Out of 48 major newspapers reviewed, most were pro-purchase. That said, not everyone was on board. Some nicknamed the deal Seward's Folly, Wall Russia, or Seward's Icebox, and there were jokes about buying a polar bear garden. Despite these doubts, many editorial writers believed the U.S. would gain economically from the deal, pointing to the potential for mining and good relations with Russia, not to mention the strategic advantage for expanding trade with East Asia. In fact, 45% of the newspapers backing the purchase cited the hope it might lead to annexing British Columbia, with the New York Times highlighting that Alaska could boost American trade with East Asia, aligning with Seward's reasons for the purchase. The New York Tribune, led by Horace Greeley, a critic of Seward, was a major voice against the purchase. Debate over this deal was influenced by the broader arguments happening around Reconstruction at the time. Some critics viewed Alaska as an unnecessary colony, or believed the U.S. would eventually acquire the territory through Destiny's Manifest, questioning the need to pay for it. Historian Ellis Paxson Oberholzer summed up the naysayers' view. The U.S. was already stretched thin managing its current territories and indigenous populations. Adding Alaska seemed to just invite more challenges given its distance and economic costs. Critics feared it would strain the nation's budget further without adding much value, dismissing the territory as essentially a barren, frozen wilderness, save for the few valuable fur animals left, which were nearly hunted to extinction. The New York World dismissively called it a sucked orange, worthless except perhaps if gold were found. On October 18, 1867, in Sitka, a ceremonial transfer took place that included a parade by both Russian and American soldiers in front of the governor's house. During this ceremony, the Russian flag was lowered, and the American flag was raised, accompanied by the sound of artillery. 6 years after the event, a detailed account emerged in Finland, authored by Thomas Holland, a blacksmith who had moved to Sitka for work. He recounted the arrival of 2 large steamships filled with items for the American government, followed shortly by the new governor and his soldiers. The scene was set at the Russian governor's wood-framed 2-story house, prominently located on a hill. There, the Russian flag, adorned with a double-headed eagle, flew and was destined to be replaced by the American flag, distinguished by its stripes and stars. On the designated day, American soldiers, with the flag-bearer leading, solemnly marched to the governor's mansion, where they were met by the Russian troops. An initial attempt to lower the Russian flag was thwarted as it got caught, refusing to come down completely. It took 3 attempts by Russian soldiers before the flag was finally freed and lowered amid musical fanfare and cannon fire from both the land and the American ships. Following the flag exchange, Captain of Second Rank Alexei Alexeyevich Peshcherov officially handed over the territory of Alaska to General Lovell Rousseau, acting under the directive of the Russian Emperor. This marked the transfer of control, including numerous military and wooden structures. General Jefferson C. Davis took up residence in the governor's house, and while most Russians departed, a handful of traders and priests stayed behind. After Alaska was transferred to the United States, quite a few Russians initially stayed in Sitka. However, the majority quickly decided to head back to Russia, thanks to the Russian-American company covering their travel expenses. One storyteller, Holland, shares a perspective that aligns with other accounts about how the Russians and Creoles felt during the transfer ceremony. They were dismayed by the lack of job opportunities and the unruly behavior of the American troops and civilians, who treated Sitka as just another frontier town. Holland's account sheds light on the challenging living conditions for those who remained under U.S. governance and offers insight into why most Russians were eager to leave. Specifically, he provides a unique retelling of the journey back to Russia aboard the Winged Arrow, a ship noted for its overcrowded conditions and crew who frequently indulged in alcohol. The ship made stops at several locations including the Hawaiian Islands, Tahiti, Brazil, London, and eventually Kronstadt, Russia, arriving on August 28, 1869. After acquiring Alaska, a territory twice the size of Texas, Americans influenced by Sumner's vision of wealth flocked there, only to discover the need for significant investment to tap into its resources. Many of these resources were also accessible closer to the continental U.S., causing most settlers to leave. By 1873, Sitka's population drastically fell from around 2,500 to a mere few hundred. It wasn't until the Klondike Gold Rush in 1896 that Alaska was broadly viewed as a valuable asset to the U.S. The lucrative seal fishery was a key motive behind the U.S.'s purchase of Alaska. This industry alone brought in substantial revenue through leasing rights for seal hunting, with profits eventually surpassing the purchase price of Alaska itself. From 1870 to 1890, around 100,000 seal skins were collected annually. The managing company paid the U.S. government a yearly rent of $50,000, plus an additional fee per skin, which amounted to significant earnings, especially for English laborers involved in preparing the skins for the global market. However, the U.S. faced challenges over its unilateral control of this business, leading to the Bering Sea controversy with Britain. The controversy arose after the U.S. seized more than 150 British sealing ships, leading to an international dispute settled by an arbitration tribunal in 1893. The tribunal decided the Bering Sea was international waters, contradicting the U.S. view that it was a domestic sea. The resolution required the U.S. to compensate Britain and both countries to adhere to specific regulations to conserve the seal population. The acquisition of Alaska is often called a steal, and is highlighted as the main success of Andrew Johnson's presidency, which otherwise did not receive much praise. Economist David R. Barker has pointed out that the U.S. government has not really made back the money it spent on buying Alaska. He explains that the taxes and royalties from minerals and energy that the government collected from Alaska have not been enough to cover the costs of managing the state and the interest on the money borrowed to buy it. John M. Miller has expanded on this idea, arguing that the profits made by United States oil companies from Alaska's oil were not sufficient to outweigh the risks they took on. However, other experts, including Scott Goldsmith and Terence Cole, have questioned the way these conclusions were reached. They argue that if you applied the same standards used for Alaska to other Western states, they would not show a positive financial return either. They believe that a closer look at the overall rise in national income, not just the revenue to the U.S. Treasury, offers a much fuller understanding of Alaska's true financial benefits as an investment. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.